4 blocks to success. You know, as much as I'd like to tell you that I just experienced this and all the trainings that I've done for business and companies, it really applies to all of life, including my own. It appears to be there's 4 major reasons why people get stuck and can't get past a certain point that is really important to do if you're going to get anywhere. So I'd like to give that to you in hopes that maybe it will help you should you experience any of these. Number 1, the first thing that I've witnessed is judgment, especially the kind of judgment where there's blame, there's right and wrong, and when that happens in any situation, it literally kills creativity. It stops imagination. Now, you might be saying, well, how do I make decisions unless I judge? Well, discernment is really the word that I like to substitute. Discernment means you're just kind of checking out all the options and you're picking the one that best suits the option for you to produce the results you want. Judgment, there tends to be some kind of a block where you're making something wrong, where there's blame involved. So if you notice that happens, it's really a feeling in your body that you could really look at. The need to judge is really not applicable in any of these situations where you're stuck. When you're making somebody wrong, including yourself, that's judgment. So that's number 1. Number 2 is the single right answer. Now, what does that mean? It means that there's more options than just staying stuck in one particular right answer. The people who come forward with options are able to ask questions, to open up the doorway, to see things differently, are the people that are able to move through this. When someone is stuck, it's really important to understand the kind of questioning that can open those doors up so you can see it a different way. Look, when the road is closed, you look for a detour. It's the same thing in communication. If they're in a position and you're in a position and there's no passing by this, it's time for somebody to explore another way. So there is no single right answer. Those who come up with more options, more answers, more ways of looking at it are going to break that deadlock and move forward. Very important in negotiations especially. The third block is assuming that it's an unchangeable position. Look, there is no such thing as an unchangeable position. Basically, it's someone just stuck in a particular perspective or point of view. It's a position of everybody agrees on this particular position, so nobody wants to move forward and go against that. I remember being a child one time, my mother said, well, if it was such a good idea, how come somebody didn't think of it before? And I would tell her in all innocence, because I'm the first to think of it. And that's the example of there's always a changeable position. There's always an unchangeable assumption to be made that you can actually move forward if you look at it the other way. The world is not flat, it's round. It took somebody to question that and say, as much as there's agreement that this is the position that the whole world takes, all it takes is one to question that and move forward by asking those kind of questions. The last one is solving their problem is really their problem. Now, I see this a lot in negotiations. I have my perspective, I have what I need, whatever it is that you need, it's really your problem, I don't care about it. That creates the foundation of a win-lose relationship, which is ultimately going to end in destruction of that particular situation. So solving their problem is not their problem. It's the way to really close down the relationship. And the person who puts themselves in the other person's shoes and say, how can I solve the problem of this impasse from both perspectives, is going to be the first to open up the doors. When you do that and you embrace the other person's needs as important as your own, then you're going to establish a long-lasting relationship. It builds trust. You're putting yourself in their shoes or their moccasins, and you're starting to understand why they need what they need. And when they sense that, there's a much more mutual satisfaction to the relationship. I'll close with a very important story that happened back in the 80s. I remember this because back in the early 80s, we had enough nuclear bombs to blow the whole planet up 3 times over. And it was a very critical time. One mistake, one finger on the button, and the world would end. And there was a lot of tension. Now remember, there was a very famous negotiation that was about to occur between President Reagan and Premier Gorbachev. There they were. Reagan was sitting in Gorbachev's office in Moscow, discussing a very important topic that the whole world literally needed to have some form of resolution. And it was, who's going to be the first to disarm the nuclear warheads? We can't kill each other 3 times over. It's very dangerous, situation. So what they did, they were at a stalemate. There was judgment, there was an unchangeable position, there was no options, and there were other people in the room that were, translators. It was a real mess. It was just really, really hard. There was a win-lose going on. And after 3 days of this, and of course the news media really expanded on this, we were getting nowhere. It was really scary. Towards the end of the third day, they both were aware they're not getting anywhere. And then President Reagan did something interesting. He stood up and he looked at Gorbachev and he said, "Would you mind clearing the room so it's just you and me?" And Gorbachev, of course, was at this point where nothing was working. We've got to try something new. And he said, "Sure." He spoke a little English, so it was okay. And then everybody cleared the room and President Reagan said, "I'll be back." President Reagan leaves the room. There's Gorbachev sitting by himself in the office wondering what's going on. About a minute went by. President Reagan opens the door, comes in the room, closes the door, walks up to Gorbachev and says, "Hi, I'm Ronald Reagan. I happen to be President of the United States, but that's not what I'm here to talk to you about." And Gorbachev smiled. He goes, "Hi, I'm Premier Gorbachev, and I'm Premier of Russia." And they sat down. And Reagan started the conversation and asked questions about Gorbachev's family, about his children, about his grandchildren. What are your goals? What is it that you want for them? And Gorbachev got emotional and shared with him the insights of his life and his family. He said, "I want them to be safe. I want them to grow up in a world without the darkness and the threat of the world ending." And then Gorbachev asked Reagan all about his family. They just became two guys having a conversation, connecting here without any of the issues, without any of the positions, without any of the judgment. And they just got into rapport. At the end of that meeting, they came up with the first proposal and it passed. And both countries, the greatest powers in the world, began the first disarmament of all the nuclear warheads for the rest of that decade. Over that time, we became safe. The nuclear warheads were no longer an issue because two men realized these 4 blocks and they passed them by going to the heart over going to the mind. Then the mind followed. And so it is.